So what it all comes down to is a story about George Washington. Now, you've all heard the story, chopping down the cherry tree. That's not what this is about. This is likely a story you haven't heard before about George Washington. So how did he get to be the father of our country? More importantly, how can you become, if you will, the father, the mother of your company? Think about the loyalty that inspired. Think about the innovation that came out of the great American experiment in democracy that still goes on. Imagine if you could tap the power of that in your company. That's what we're talking about. So what is it George Washington did? Well, the first thing he did was to recognize that he was a member of what you'd call a naturally occurring group. Now, that's a big thing to say at lunch, naturally occurring group. So we wrestled with what is that thing called, that naturally occurring group. If you've seen the television show The Office, that's a naturally occurring group. So what is that thing? Is that an organization? Sort of, except the guy who delivers your UPS might be part of it. The person who fixes your copy machine might be part of it. So it's an organization, but not just an organization. If you run a big operation, it might be a department, except not really. It kind of cuts across it. So Washington noticed that he was a member of three very specific, if you will, tribes, these naturally occurring groups. One was the wealthy landowners in Virginia. Two was the delegates in the Continental Congress, another naturally occurring group. And three, of course, is he was a fellow officer in the militia. So that's the first thing he did. Now, the stories you've heard about Washington having fake teeth, wooden teeth, and having a lot of pain, a speech impediment as a result, are true. Chopping down the cherry tree, not so true. Fake teeth, true. As a result, he was very afraid to speak. Now, why would he be afraid to speak? Because he had a speech impediment and because it hurt. So what do you do if you don't speak? Well, you might want to write this down. You listen, right? So he goes into these naturally occurring groups and he listens to what their highest aspiration is as a group. And he hears over and over words like freedom and independence. Now, was Washington the smartest compared to people like Madison, Jefferson, Adams, if you're watching the miniseries? Not even close. The only asset he had was a speech impediment that forced him to listen. And so when he finally spoke, he spoke for the group, the naturally occurring group, the tribe. And he did it so artfully that people said, that man speaks for me, including the Adams and the Franklins and the Jeffersons. Now that's what he did. So if you want tribal leadership in a nutshell, it's that. Here are the steps. Number one, you identify these groups that already exist. They don't exist because you made them in an organization chart. They exist because people tribe. It's what they've always done. It's what they always will do. Tribes helped us get through the Ice Age. They will help us weather whatever is on the economic front, be it good or bad. Number one, you just notice these natural, if you will, clumpings. Same thing as Washington. Number two is you listen to how they talk. What is their highest aspiration? Do they talk like the TSA when you get your luggage screened? We're going to talk more about that in a second. Or do they talk like Google, changing the world? You have to know how they talk. You have to become a bit of a physician and diagnose the culture that you hear. Number three is you figure out where are they on this, what we'll call tribal stage. It's a 1 to 5. 5 is everything you want. That's Apple, that's Pixar, that's the best run organizations in the world. And 1 is what you don't want. It is, no joke, workplace violence, which seems to be on the rise in the United States, partially because of the economy. So you don't want a 1, you want a 5. You have to know where you are and then take the appropriate steps to move 1 level. Washington inherited what we will call a stage 3 tribe, and he moved it to a 4. That's all he did. And as a result, he became the father of our country. You can do all of these. You will be able to do them by the time we're done. Okay, this is not a pitch for consulting services. You've already got the book. Not asking you to do anything other than to give it a try. And if you happen to learn something, please let us know so we can share with other people what you've learned. Okay, so then the hard truth of all this is that your organization, your naturally occurring groups, your tribes, can be found somewhere on this 1 to 5 scale. Remember, 1 is everything you don't want, 5 is everything you do. We're going to move from 1 to 5. Starting at the very bottom, this is the culture of a prison. This is the culture of a gang. These only happen in U.S. organizations about little less than 2% of the time. But if you go in, now why are we talking about it? Because when the economy goes through hiccups, there's the tendency for more tribes to move down to this level. So as leaders, you have to be on the lookout for it. The way people talk, if you look on the column to the right, is life stinks. It's not that my life stinks, it's that life is inherently unfair. As a result of life being inherently unfair, people will do whatever it takes to survive. That's despairing hostility. You want to know how to survive in a prison? You adopt the view that life stinks and I'll do whatever it takes. So all we need to do with one is be on the lookout for it. Two, on the other hand, happens a quarter of the time in U.S. workplaces, 25% of the time. In all likelihood, the place that renewed your driver's license is a stage 2 culture. If you've gotten your luggage screened at the TSA, that is in all likelihood, not always, but in all likelihood, a stage 2 culture. They do not say life stinks, they say my life stinks. If I got to go to this cool business expo and have this awesome food and network with people like this and hear about the latest things in technology, then my life wouldn't stink, but I don't, so it does. As a result of that being the way they talk, they come across not violent, but apathetic. You wonder, do they have a pulse? Is their brain firing? So recently, I was going through the Chicago airport, getting my luggage screened, and there were these two folks, TSA operators, and they were looking at the screen very intently. It seemed like the safest place on the planet. And the line was getting longer, and I was nervous I was going to miss my flight. So when it finally came my turn to take off my shoes, take off my coat, you know the routine, put everything on the belt, here's actually what they talked about as they stopped the belt, made it go back and forth, looked intently at the screen. These were literally the words that came out of their mouth. Oh, man, my girlfriend and I just had a fight, as they're backing up the belt. Look, man, I got to go call her. Can you cover for me with the boss? You know what a blank he is. Oh, man, I hate this. I'm just, falling asleep. The next person said, the guy over to him said, well, I'll do that on one condition. Man, I am so bored. I got to take a long break or something. Can you tell the boss I'm over at American because I'm just so bored? A nuclear bomb could have gone through that conveyor belt and they wouldn't have seen it, okay? Because the way they talk is my life stinks. Now, question, and we're not really set up for Q&A, but you might think about this rhetorically in your own head. How much innovation, topic of the day, happens in a stage 2 culture? Answer, just enough to not get fired. That's how much. Think of The Office, the TV show, if you've watched it. How much innovation happens there? A lot of innovation about paperclip Olympics, which they do when the boss is out of the office. But innovation related to profit, related to product, related to customer service, basically zero. But we're not done. We move on to 3. Remember, this is what Washington inherited, was a stage 3 culture. Here, I love to talk about my values. I love to talk about my vision for this company. I love to talk about what this company can do for me and for everyone else. Now, if you listen closely to what's coming out of my mouth, I am not talking about leadership, I'm not talking about values, and I'm not talking about vision. I'm talking about me. And if you ask me, are you talking about yourself? I'll say no, I'm talking about leadership and vision and all that stuff. One of my favorite stories that came out of the research in the book was a very well-known, I won't mention the name, very well-known CEO, actually CEO no longer, up in Silicon Valley. We had an hour-and-a-half interview with him, which we transcribed, and he talked the same way that I just did, about my vision and my values and so on. So he called those of us who interviewed him a few months later and said, I'm under some trouble with my board. Now, you know what a great leader I am because you interviewed me, and you undoubtedly picked up on the fact that I'm a really good leader. So could you intervene with the board and tell them what a great leader I am because they want me to step down as CEO? So I sent him the transcript, remember transcript? Highlighted all of the I's, the me's, and the my's, all the way down the page, on the next page, on the next page. And then because he's a person with a hard science background, did a little division, number of sentences divided by the number of I, me, my's, and it came out to 1.1. Every sentence was an I, me, or my on average, or a little more. Now, if that's the way everybody in your organization talks, remember that's what Washington walked into, then you might ask the question in your head, well, how much innovation happens? The answer is a whole bunch. I'm a great innovator. I love to talk about innovation. I have so many ideas, I don't even know what to do with them. The problem is that's how everybody talks. Welcome to a faculty meeting at a university. Welcome to a group dental practice. Welcome to a healthcare organization. I'm innovative, just ask me. Problem is everybody's doing a lot of talking. So what's the leverage point to move from individual innovation to group innovation? I have to tell the story of David Kelly. David has two roles in life. One is he runs one of the most innovative organizations on the planet called IDEO. So what does IDEO do? Well, if you've used an Apple mouse, they invented that. If you've used one of those push-top toothpaste dispensers that mixes the toothpaste together on the fly, they invented that, and a bunch of other things. Been on the cover of Business Week. So why do we care about David? Well, interestingly, I mentioned he's got two roles. He's got the role running IDEO, and he's got the role as a professor at Stanford. Here's what he says about the difference. He says, at Stanford, my business card says David Kelly, member of the academy, really smart guy, professor, blah, blah, blah. It's all about him, right? It's all about David. When he goes into IDEO, he's got a business card there too that simply says David Kelly, IDEO. Doesn't say president, doesn't say CEO, doesn't say founder, even though he is all of those. He is a member of the group. He said, at Stanford, we innovate like mad. He said, I'll clean up the language a little bit, we win a lot of Nobel Prizes at Stanford based on individual innovation. The problem is, as we heard from our last two speakers, this is the age of collective innovation. So that's insufficient. So what do? Well, we saw the model with George Washington. We want to move up one stage to 4. Now, some people look at this and they say, oh, stage 3, I, stage 4, we. Okay, so if I do search and replace, I to we, we've made the leap. No, then you sound like a weirdo saying we when you mean I. And not to pick on anyone in particular, could easily pick on any of the candidates for doing this, but since it was in the news this morning, Bill Clinton was interviewed. And he said, well, when we were president. Who's we? When you were president. No, say I when you mean I. The focus, though, changes from the individual to the group. Now, how do you do that without becoming a weirdo? Well, you do what Washington did. What is it he listened for? He listened for key aspirations, for values. Now let's go back to something. Stage 2. Let's say that you inherit the Department of Motor Vehicles, and you're going to use all of your leaderly skills to orchestrate a turnaround. Remember the way they talk. My life stinks, can't get anything done, no one listens to me, my ideas have no traction. And you go in there and you preach values. They'll yawn, they'll look at their watch, a little puddle of drool will form in the corner of their mouth. That's probably not going to get traction, because the way you move 2 to 3 is different from how you move 3 to 4. So why are we talking so much about moving 3 to 4? Because that's the state of American business. Stage 3 is almost half of U.S. workplaces. And the smarter the people are, the more the people are natural stars, the more likely it is to be a stage 3 organization. That's Stanford. You got to go out of your way to create IDEO. So how do you do it? You do, again, what Washington did. You listen for values, and you then put together a project, an initiative that brings those values to life. Well, Washington said at one point, if we're modernizing the language here, if we're serious about this whole independence thing, among other things, we've got to do ourselves a declaration. We've got to make a declaration for which we will commit our lives. That's taking a value and making it real. At that point, people begin to talk about we. Not the weirdo kind of we, but they mean it. It's serious. It's real. It has the resonance of the voice of the group. And at that point, people say yes. That person on stage, that person who just sent out that email, that person speaks for me. That's how you create high performance. Now think of IDEO, which has a We're Great culture. I mentioned all the innovation that happens there. Stage 4 organizations have to go out of their way not to innovate. It's built into their DNA. Why is it that Goldman Sachs did not have the problem during subprime, during the height of the crisis? Now we're in the hiccup period of the crisis, hopefully. But why is it Goldman Sachs didn't suffer in the same way that, say, Citibank did? Well, among other things, Goldman Sachs has a stage 4 culture. So someone saw it coming. And as soon as that someone saw it coming, the whole group, the whole tribe started reacting real time to what was going on. Whereas at Citibank, people were still debating about whether the problem was real or not when Goldman had already taken corrective action. It's not just about survival, it's about finding a way to flourish no matter what's happening in the economy. So you want to recession-proof your company in case that's where we're headed? You want to build stage 4. Well, what if the economy, is going to thrive? You want to be able to succeed based on what's happening. Again, you want to build a stage 4. Now, we were all set to go to press on this until we walked into one organization, and I got to mention this because this is the top of the mountain. Okay, speaking of innovation, the company was Amgen, biotech company out in Thousand Oaks, California, barely making their rent, afraid they weren't going to make payroll. And yet, this is how they talked. So who's your competitor? At USC, we know who our competitor is. It's our crosstown rival, UCLA. Right? Google, Microsoft, natural competitors. So we asked, who's your competitor? We expected to hear the only reasonable answer, which would have been Genentech. Here's what we heard. Cancer. What? Yeah, like death. Huh? The way they were talking struck us as being not just strange, but borderline insane. Now, why were they talking that way? Interestingly, it's the same way that people talk at Pixar. There was a gentleman standing outside in one of the booths out here in a kilt. There's a person we met at Pixar who wears a kilt every day. He's an animator. He draws people in kilts, right? And he says, isn't it great that I get to show up in a place where I can wear a kilt and express the values of my heritage, my Scottish heritage? And they talk a little funny. They talk with a sense of almost kids. You see the word innocent wonderment up there. That's the essence of innocent wonderment. Wow. We got a molecule and it's like $1 billion drug. I think we can do it again. I think we can cure cancer. Don't you think we can? I think we can cure cancer. Wow, that's amazing. Now, for those of you who think that's far-fetched, I'll just close with this example before wrapping it up. We interviewed Mike Eruzione for the book, just by nodding. Anyone know who Mike Eruzione is? Just many of you do. He was captain of the 1980 hockey team that beat the Soviets, went on to win the gold medal, okay? Now, the coaches died, so Mike was the captain. That's as high up in that organization as you can get today. So here was the question. So Mike, when you knew you had won, what is it you said? It is not what you've seen in the movies. It was not America #1 and the chest pounding. It wasn't that. So Mike, what did you say? He said, first of all, I said nothing. Then I whispered, wow. Did we really do that? But what about America #1 and beating the Soviets and all that? He said, look, we were hard hat kids from Boston. In Minnesota, we couldn't even spell communism. I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying that's what he said. So we couldn't even spell communism. It wasn't about beating anybody. It was about doing what nobody thought was possible. That's the essence of Stage 5. It represents only 2% of U.S. workplaces. But those 2% own their markets. Think, again, Pixar, Google, Apple, and you think of the companies that produce not just innovation to beat their competitors, but innovation to change the world. That's where all of this is going. Okay, so here's where we are. We started talking about Washington after we did a little football wrap. Started talking about Washington, mentioned that leaders do 4 things. Number 1, they notice these naturally occurring groups. Number 2, they notice how they talk. Number 3, they figure out which of these tribal stages they've got. Washington happened to have a lot of people who were pretty full of themselves. Stage 3. You then take the stage appropriate step to move what you've got to the next level. So if you've got stage 1, remember that's violent, go find a new group. Not kidding. 2, you want to find the few people in it. Imagine working with the TSA. Even in a group like that, there are people who want it to be different. Your job is to find them and make a strong connection with them and convince them that it can be different for them and it can be different for others. You change a stage 2 group 1 person at a time. But no, as soon as they go back to the group, everybody's going to devour them and tell them that they're stepping out of line, which means you got to create a little pocket that is going to do things different. It's your job to create a bubble if that's the case. What about 3? Well, we've talked about this. You've got to get down to values, what people prize among everything else, the principles they hold most dear. And then, like the Declaration of Independence, you put together an initiative, a project of some kind that brings that to life, that makes it real. And then people organize themselves around that, and that becomes the glue that holds them together. Now, what if you're lucky enough to already have one of those stage 4 groups that's already preaching we're great, aligned around values and all that stuff? At that point, you want to ask the question that only the best companies in the world can ask with any authenticity. Going back to the speaker this morning, which is, what would change the world? Now, ask that in a stage 2 culture, they'll laugh at you. Ask it in a stage 3 culture, hands will go up. I know how to change the world. In stage 4, they'll say, well, we know how to beat the competitor, but I'm not sure about this whole world thing. So you got to work with it until people can put together a project that is that big in scope. I'll end with this story. One of the people we interviewed was Jim Clifton. He's CEO and chairman of the Gallup organization. They do, among other things, polling about who's going to win president and so on. So they've got Nobel laureates. They've clearly won that game. There are no competitors for Gallup. So the question to Jim was, so what are you going to do to put something together to keep all this momentum going? He said, for the first time, we're putting together a world poll. So what does that mean? He said, we got all these Nobel laureates. We figured out how to measure 97% of the world's opinion about any topic. So we started mentioning things, and if I repeated what he said, you'd think I was being political, so I won't mention the content. But I said to him, Jim, that's your opinion. This sent a chill up my spine. He said, no, Dave, that's the world's opinion. Notice that's putting together a project that changes the world. So what do we do with all this? Well, it's pretty simple. You do what Washington did. You go in, you find these naturally occurring groups, you notice them. You listen to how they talk. You figure out what the leverage points are that will take them not to 5, but to the next level. You got a 2, you want to move it to a 3. You got a 3, you want to move it to a 4. You're lucky enough to have a 4, go to 5, make history, change the world. Put all of that together, and that is the essence of tribal leadership. In conclusion, I would just say, first of all, thank you again for the opportunity to be here, for the invitation, for celebrating innovation. You know, it is a uniquely American construction to talk about innovation in business. I go all around the world, and when I mention U.S. business, you get respect around the world, no matter what's going on politically or anything else. This is what this country is known for, and I just appreciate the fact so much that you're here to celebrate it, to learn from each other, and more importantly, to innovate and take all of us to the next level. Thank you very much.